if and when the system collapses, I think 2008, but significantly worse, all those assets that you thought you owned, you're going to find out very quickly those have been used as collateral. As the derivative complex melts down, you're going to find yourself at the back of the line as any other creditor trying to recover scraps from this horrific dumpster fire.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for March 4th through March 11th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature backdated 1-ounce silver maples at $3.39 over spot. We also have circulated British gold Queen Elizabeth sovereigns at $26.99 over melt. And finally, we're offering our choice 1-ounce palladium bars at just $119 over spot. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. Author Alex Newman joins us again today, Monday, March 4th. He's a regular contributor on the Epoch Times and many other venues. He stands up for liberty and the freedom of families against government overreach. Alex, thanks for joining us again on Liberty and Finance.
Great to be here. Thank you very much for having me down again.
There are so many topics that come up between our visits that it's almost overwhelming what we need to get an update from you on, but you are a student of many of these things. You do constant research and writing and speaking about these topics. We wanted first to break open one with you that our audience and our subscribers are already following with some significant concern. There was a book, The Great Taking, that came out last year. It's available in a free PDF download for those who want to check it out. There's a link in the description of this video so that they can read the copy of the book themselves. It's about what we've talked about for years, is that nothing in the banks is yours, but now it turns out that nothing in the stock brokerage account is yours either. So any of those companies you think you're part owner of, you really don't have legal title to. And it's the laws have been set up, and you're going to explain to us this, the laws have been set up so that in the event of a disruption, those ownership can be shifted off to a third party and not the people that think they own the shares of the stock. But there's a starting backlash, a pushback against this that is starting, and you're talking about some first state legislation at the state level to nullify some of these egregious laws that have been passed under the table, behind our backs over the past couple of decades to make it so that people don't even own what they think they own anymore. But now there's a pushback. Can you tell us more about your latest research on that?
Well, thank you, Dunnigan. This is a hugely significant topic, and if David Webb is right, these evildoers are hoping to crash the system as soon as this year. So this is something that we need to be taking very seriously, something that we need to be making a significant priority. And so last week I had on my nationally syndicated radio program the first state legislator to file a bill to protect investors from this. Her name is Representative Julie Auch. She's in South Dakota, and she filed a bill. It was called the Small Investor Protection Act. Basically, she found out what was going on here. And I've been talking to legislators across the country about this. There's a lot of interest now. I did a little bit of communication back and forth with David Webb. So even though the American public has not yet woken up to this situation, behind the scenes, there's a lot of action going on. And so Representative Auch filed this bill that would have basically restored your property rights when it comes to stocks and other securities. So what they did, the evildoers, over a period of several decades, but starting back in the 1990s, they quietly changed state laws in all 50 states to basically redefine the relationship that an investor has with his or her stocks. You're no longer an owner. You now have what's called a security entitlement. And so this has enabled a lot of these big brokerages, a lot of these big financial institutions to basically take the securities that you thought you owned and use them as collateral for this massive derivatives complex that looks ready to blow up at any moment, which means that if and when the system collapses, I think 2008, but significantly worse, all those assets that you thought you owned, you're going to find out very quickly those have been used as collateral. As the derivative complex melts down, you're going to find yourself at the back of the line as any other creditor trying to recover scraps from this horrific dumpster fire. And so this legislation that was filed in South Dakota, very, very significant. It's the first bill that we've seen filed on this. And, of course, these laws have been changed in all 50 states, it looks like. The ones that we've looked at, they have been changed. And so what happened was, and Julie tells me this story in the interview. I had been working with her even before this on some other things, CBDCs and stuff. What she said was she went around educating the other legislators, like, hey, guys, there's a problem. This is huge. She said the legislators in both parties, right? This is not a partisan issue. Republicans, Democrats all care about their retirements, their 401ks, their pension funds, et cetera. She said there was a lot of enthusiasm for this, a lot of alarm among other elected officials. And then out came the big guns, the big lobbyists who just blatantly tried to deceive the legislature, who blatantly twisted arms among the key folks at the South Dakota legislature. And so it's from what we can gather, they sent this bill now to a committee to die. But I can guarantee you this is not the end of this. There's a lot of attention now being paid to this among elected officials. And I think the public is going to be made aware pretty soon as well. Because, again, if this is not dealt with, we could all find ourselves, as the World Economic Forum predicted famously even before COVID, that by 2030 you will own nothing. This appears to be one of the key mechanisms through which they're going to accomplish that.
Yeah, David Webb, in his book, The Great Taking, reminds us that ownership of stock shares is more than just owning pieces of paper or potentially being able to get some dividend payouts or something like that, or benefit from the price appreciation of shares of a company. It means owning part of the company, which means the inventories, the supplies, the tooling, the factories, the capital assets of the company. So all the factories, all of the implementation, all of those things that are necessary assets for the necessary production and profit making would be swept away and taken into ownership of somebody else. They know you think you own it, but it's going to be not you that owns it if this plays out the way that the powers that be have set it up. And it's difficult pill for people to swallow, that they think, I own my shares, I bought them, they're mine. And it's just as difficult as it is for people to realize that the deposits in the bank are no longer theirs, that the bank is now, following the Dodd-Frank Act of 2010, are unsecured loans, and people are unsecured creditors to the banks. It's distressing to realize that most people have no idea that the things that they think they own, they do not own. Any further follow-up on this and the outlook going forward?
Well, this is a crisis situation. Then again, we have to be taking this seriously. And of course, it's not just a uniquely American problem. These types of changes have been made around the world. And they've already tested out some of the machinery, some of the statutes. They've already got court rulings on these things going back to 2008 during that collapse. So they are setting us up here for a massive fleecing. You're exactly right. When you think about ownership of a stock, you need to recognize that represents ownership, in theory at least, of real physical things, the factories, the assets that the company has. And this is just we're being set up here for a catastrophe on every front. So, I don't necessarily agree with all of David Webb's conclusions. He gets to the end and he says, well, these evildoers don't even really know what they're doing. They don't want this. I think they know very well what they're doing. I think they very much want this. And we've got to take it seriously. It's what you pointed out with the with the deposits in the bank, and then now with your stocks and bonds, they're setting us up here for a catastrophe, and we cannot allow it. We cannot allow them to end up owning everything. I think Great Depression, but worse. It's unthinkable. And so we need our state legislatures to take this seriously, to treat it like the emergency that it is. A lot of the legislatures are going out of session soon, but this is something that is so important that if you have to call an emergency session, if you have to call a special session to get a bill on this passed, that is something that is well worth doing, especially if David is right on his timeline. Again, he expressed publicly his view that they may be setting us up for this year, 2024. So this isn't maybe necessarily something that you can wait until the next legislative session to deal with. This is something that we have to address right now.
I have not read the bill that was sent to committee in South Dakota. Do you know the heart of it as far as how it would propose to return the power back to the individual stockholder rather than to some centralized clearinghouse or authority, that sort of thing?
So if I understand it correctly, this just reverses what was done back in the 1990s. So it reestablishes ownership. I believe it also dealt with the jurisdiction, because what's happened here is a lot of the jurisdiction has been shifted over to New York or whatever, where they think they can run the court system. But what this would do is then it would allow the investors to have standing and jurisdiction in their own state, which would make it much more difficult to swindle all these small investors out of all their resources.
All right, so that's the first pushback, legislative pushback against the Great Taking. is coming out of a legislator in South Dakota. If there is a link to a bill, we'll put it in the description of this video as well. So you can take a look at that and encourage your legislators at the state level to do the same. Another thing, Alex, you just came out with a book just a couple weeks ago, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death. You've been on our show several times talking about the crisis situation also facing our children. Many of us went through the public school system and look back and say, well, gee, I said the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and I learned my reading, writing, and arithmetic. I learned some basic civics about the structure of government. I learned a little bit about the Constitution. Many people have become aware, especially since COVID, when there was some at-home schooling that happened over computers, and people got to have parents for the first time got to look over their children's shoulder and what was going on in the classroom. We're shocked to find what is not being taught and what garbage is being taught in public schools. You've talked to us in the past about how this was all done by design, that the school system itself was designed by atheists and socialists, and for over a century has been methodically increasing, getting us farther and farther off the rails. It's a very difficult pill for most people to swallow, that the government school system, which we're all paying for, we have no choice in the matter, we pay for it in our taxes, that most children, the vast majority of children are subject to, it was intentionally designed to convert our children into socialists and moral relativists and so on, and to split children away from their parents and away from the family values and so on, and away from religion. Can you talk to us about that point in particular, that the schools are not, they're not malfunctioning, they're functioning exactly as they were designed to do, that we are actually living behind enemy lines, and that those who are starting to feel that that's the case, they sense that this whole thing is structured against the family and against the individuals and against freedom and against the Constitution, are in fact correct. Can you give us more understanding on how the school system was designed to do exactly what it is doing?
Yeah, and that's actually how we open the book, Donegan, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, Government Schools, War on Faith, Family, and Freedom, and How to Stop It. We go back in history and show you the people who dreamed up this system, the people who built this system, and the people who kind of designed the system. And what we prove using primary source documents, smoking gun evidence, is that this was always the plan. The school system was never intended to educate your children in the traditional sense that a normal person understands education. It was always intended to indoctrinate your children, to shift their attitudes, their values, and their beliefs, really to fundamentally transform their worldview, and from that transformation of worldview to transform the society, the government, the institutions around them. And this is indisputable. This is not something that can be debated or discussed. This is not a question of who's right or who's wrong. The evidence is absolutely overwhelming. It is absolutely indisputable. And the problem here comes from this cognitive dissonance. People don't want to accept this because of the implications. And you pointed out something really important, Dunnigan. Everybody, and this happens each generation. It's been happening for generations. Each generation says, wow, the school system is getting worse. It's not as good as when I was a kid. When I was a kid, it was really good. Now it's really bad. And the only reason people think that is because they don't have a point of reference. They don't know what education looked like before the government got involved in education. So that's one of the things that I spent a lot of time on in this book, is what did education look like before the government camel nose got under the tent? What did it look like prior to the involvement of the state in education? And what you'll find is that Americans were incredibly well educated. We had almost universal literacy. Even foreigners who came here were absolutely astounded at the level of education that the American people had. And the evidence of the education level of Americans back then is, again, absolutely overwhelming. We've got the anecdotal evidence, and then we have the data showing this, right? We have studies that were published in the early 1800s showing that virtually all young Americans could read, write, could write legibly, actually, and neatly, is what one of the authors of these studies, DuPont de Nemours, wrote in 1812 in his National Education in the United States of America. So this is, I believe, one of the most critical issues facing the country, facing the church, and facing the family. This is an existential crisis. This is a crisis that if we don't deal with it, it's going to destroy everything we love, everything we hold dear, very much including our liberty, very much including our prosperity, very much including our families. and very much including our country. We are not going to survive as a free nation. Our civilization will not survive. And the fruit that came from that civilization, the liberty, the prosperity, the peace, the security, all of that, I can guarantee it, will be gone if we don't address this. So we're seeing really encouraging movement on this. We're seeing a mass exodus. Millions of families have fled just in recent years. We actually have an incredible array of people who've lined up to support the book. The foreword is actually written by the Honorable Diane Douglas. She was the most recent state superintendent of all the public schools in Arizona. And what she says is, I spent 4 years as the top official in Arizona on education trying to fix this. It is unfixable because it's doing what it was designed to do. So she strongly endorses our conclusions. We've got endorsements from a lot of the greatest leaders in the liberty movement in America. We've got Kirk Cameron. We've got Pete Hegseth, the co-host of Fox and Friends, wrote a very strong endorsement for us. General Michael Flynn, former National Security Advisor, Dr. James Lindsay, Greg Hunter of USA Watchdog, G. Edward Griffin, Sam Sorbo, Dr. Carol Swain, the co-chair of the White House 1776 Commission. Just so many good Americans who have come out and supported. Even Americans who don't necessarily agree with our strategy that we're endorsing, like Tina Deskovich, co-founder of Moms for Liberty. They're working hard on reforming the schools and on school boards. She wrote a very powerful endorsement. So I'm really encouraged by how the word is getting out, by how Americans are catching on to this. But this is one of those crises where if we don't deal with it, it's all over. I mean, you may succeed in pushing back the inevitable a few years, maybe even a generation. But my generation, 70% in scientific polls say they're socialists. This is not going to end well if we don't address this.
Yeah, that's one of the surprising things when you mentioned school boards. The natural response from most parents who are getting past I thought I could trust the schools to do the right thing by my children. Okay, I guess I'll get involved. I guess I'll go to a school board meeting. The surprising recommendation from your book is that's not even close to being enough. Explain what you meant by that.
Yeah, thank you, Dunnigan. And this is the part that people just can't understand until it smacks them in the face. You cannot reform a system that is working as intended, right? There's no series of changes in policy and curriculum or whatever that you could make to this system that would make it acceptable, that would make it a safe place for children, because it was always designed to do this. So it really needs to be ripped out from the roots and completely reimagined. Now, I do encourage people to run for school board if they feel called to that. But far more important than that, I use the analogy of a burning building. Like if your children are inside the burning building, you wouldn't dream of running for school board. You wouldn't dream of calling your legislators. You would, as the highest priority, run into the burning building, grab your children, and run as far as your legs could carry you, and then wake the town. Now, after you have pulled your children out of this burning building, if you feel like a good way to wake the town might be to get involved in the school board, good. Maybe you can share with other parents the horror show that is taking place in the government school system. But don't expect to be able to reform this system. It's producing poison fruit because it came from a poison seed. And I'll clarify, too, on this fire analogy that I've been using for years. It's really a completely inadequate analogy. I don't know of a better one, but it's really quite inadequate because a fire is something that will hurt your children physically. It might even kill them. Let's not deceive ourselves. Children are being killed in an enormous number. That's why we use the term indoctrinating our children to death. Suicide is now one of the top causes of death among children in the United States. Even one generation ago, this would have been completely unfathomable. Right? School shootings are now routine. You have kids coming to school, killing each other, stabbing each other, overdosing on heroin. These are things that would have been completely unthinkable even a generation ago. So let's not deceive ourselves. Yes, children are being killed by the system, just like they would be killed by a fire, but it's orders of magnitude worse than that. They're being destroyed emotionally, spiritually, academically, in every possible way. They're being mutilated. Little boys are being castrated. Little girls are having hysterectomies and double mastectomies. They're being injected with testosterone. So let's not deceive ourselves and think that, well, if we could just go back 20 years, everything would be great. No, 20 years ago, we were on the highway to hell that we are now getting closer to. And the only viable solution, if you love your children, if you love your country, if you love everything that is good and wholesome and true, is to remove those children as quickly as we possibly can and build new systems to absorb the families and the children that are fleeing from this collapsing, wicked old system. And
I understand you've got help for people who want to take action right now at Public School Exit.
Yes, publicschoolexit.com is a ministry we started. So even though I have a fancy title, I'm executive director. I'm just a volunteer because I'm so passionate about this. I want to help as many families, as many churches as possible to rescue the children from their congregations. We've got data. I serve on the advisory board for the Nehemiah Institute. We've got data showing that over 80%, maybe 90% of Christian children from Christian homes who go through 12 years of government brainwashing are going to leave the church. They're going to leave the faith. So for the churches, this is an existential threat. For families, this is an existential threat. So we're doing this. We actually have a big fundraiser coming up in Mar-a-Lago in just a couple of weeks. It'll be March 21st. Unfortunately, it's totally full. We've packed the house, so we won't have any seats left, unfortunately. But we'll be doing another one next year. And what we're doing here, we're raising money to help the low-income folks, the single moms, the small churches that want to do something on this. We want to build up our war chest because we believe that every child needs to be removed from this system. We're not willing to leave behind one single child, even if he's got a single mom, even if the parents are poor. We want to make sure that every child leaves the system so that real education can be reestablished in this country.
And, the saying, the implications of this go beyond the individual children who are precious. They're irreplaceable. They're priceless. They're involved. It's about the future of society as well, because the old saying is the hand that rocks the cradle rocks the world. It's very strategic the way this whole plan was laid out by the socialists to make sure that the hearts and minds of the next generation were moved until they wouldn't want to be members of a constitutional republic, and they wouldn't want to be members of their own family and respect their own parents and that sort of thing. So it's the implications are huge. They're everlasting in our future. This could be the end of democratic republic, and that's why it's so necessary for people to understand that. And we ended up homeschooling all 5 of our children. I know you're homeschooling your children. It's absolutely necessary to realize that the implications of bringing up children in their formative years to understand, because forever it's been that the adults look back at the younger generation, they don't respect their elders. My son actually won a contest with the Optimist Club as a high schooler, writing an essay on this, and he gave a very glowing quote in there, a direct historical quote to that extent about the young generation has no respect for their elders, blah, 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 blah. It was written back in the days of Socrates in 500 BC. So this has been a typical thing. But the thing is that the other saying from Scripture is, if you raise the child in the way he should go, and when he is grown, he will not depart from it. Children tend to come around, tend to understand as life teaches them some lessons, and they realize that they're not gods, that there are authorities that they are beholden to, etc., that they adopt adult virtue more as they grow. However, that's assuming that they were brought up in the formative years with that in the way that they should go. When that has been handed over from parents to the government, and the government is under control of these deep staters that, as you say, are causing this big pushback against the reform that's trying to come in South Dakota to say, for example, in South Dakota with the Great Taking, saying you're not going to do this to us. But when you realize that there are embedded great deep state interests that are against the will of our Creator and against the good of the family and against the good of our children, you cannot assume they'll just come around. The kids will be all right, is another old saying. Not true when they've been brought up by someone who's not you and teaching them things that are not good for their eternal well-being. On that vein, you've talked to us about some more falsehood that we are being exposed to, and there's some new breaking research that's coming out to say that some of the global warming data and claims that we've been subjected to over the past decades has been now demonstrably proven false by some latest research. Can you bring us up to date on that?
Yeah, thank you. So just last week, I published a major expose in the Epic Times. I spent a long time working on it because, quite frankly, this science is rather opaque. I don't have a PhD in anything. And so it takes a long time of reading these studies and talking to these scientists to truly get a handle on what's going on so that I can try to break it down in simple terms for a layman who doesn't have a scientific background. But what we have is a series of new studies that have just been published over the last year by a group called CERES. It's the Center for Earth Science Research and Environmental Studies, something like that, run by Dr. Willie Soon, who is at Harvard, the two, Dr. Connolly and Dr. Connolly of Ireland. They've assembled a team of dozens of very prominent, very prestigious scientists around the world. And they've just published a series of studies. There's about 5 of them that have come out from CERES scientists showing huge problems in the data. And so what I focused on for this one was a little process called homogenization of the data, even a difficult word to pronounce. But what's going on here is the people pushing the global warming narrative are homogenizing the data. What that means is they're blending it with other data sets. They're correcting the data. Now, nobody would argue, or nobody with any sense would argue that this data, some of it doesn't need to be corrected, right? If you have a temperature station that 100 years ago was out in a field, was out in a meadow, and now there's a giant parking lot there, or it's right next to an air conditioning vent where it's just pouring out heat, well, then, of course, you need to adjust that to show that something happened here, right? That the data got warmer, not because of global warming, but because there's a parking lot there now. But what's happened is these scientists actually looked under the hood, so to speak, and looked at the algorithms. They found huge problems, right? For one, NOAA's algorithms, they actually put different adjustments in on a daily basis for the same temperature stations. Another big problem they have is they're actually blending the urban and rural data. So there's something known as the urban heat island effect. Basically, because cities are growing up around where a lot of these temperature stations used to be, you have this urban heat island effect where it looks like there's warming, but there's not global warming. There's just localized warming because there's a city now, and the black pavement is reflecting the sun and making it very hot. So you have to control for some of these types of things. And what these scientists did, they examined the way this was done. They found major flaws in this. I encourage people to read this. It actually is a follow-up to another article I just did a few months ago, also in the Epic Times, about other studies that these CERES scientists did. They found, for example, that when you take the urban heat island effect out of the data, 40% of the warming disappears. All the rest of it can very easily be explained by changes in solar activity, what's called total solar irradiance. This is data that's tracked by NASA. It doesn't include the cloud issues. So all of these huge flaws in the data. And when you control for all these things, when you take out the depending on who you ask, either the fraud or the mistakes, the global warming crisis completely disappears. There is no global warming crisis. And I spoke to several scientists who said, look, this is obviously deliberate. All the changes are being made to look like there is a global warming crisis when really there is not. These are just natural cyclical things. And when you take out the fraud or you take out the mistakes, that becomes very obvious. So huge issue. Trillions of dollars worth of money, public money, by the way, is being spent under the guise of dealing with this crisis. Massive policy changes, restructuring our energy, our transportation, even our social policy, our dietary policy, our agricultural policies are coming in under the guise of this narrative that's supported with this obviously phony data. So the implications could not be more significant, Dunnigan.
I'm going to draw an underscore on this as well, because you just mentioned some of the implications about policy decisions that are being driven off of this. One of the things we've talked about is this idea of globalization of problems that require globally centralized solutions. The world has got along pretty well for the past few centuries with independent sovereign states, each being able to look after their own land, their own people, that sort of thing. But now, just in the past several decades, there's been this idea that that things have to be addressed at a global level. That means we need a global government, global finances, global control, global monitoring, global surveillance, global loss of privacy, global tracking, contact tracing, etc. And this is one of them. They say all in the interest of public health, that climate crisis is a public health crisis, and therefore it can be thrown in there with all the other public health crises. That means we could have lockdowns, we could have all kinds of draconian measures. You can't go more than 15 minutes from your home, et cetera, and all of that being driven because this is perceived as a global problem. Boy, we could really go a long way on this one, because there's other things that recently, like health crises or whatever, that they had to be deemed an emergency so that you could get emergency authorization, so that you could exceed all the normal constitutional, you could bypass all the normal constitutional protections. We interview constitutional attorney Dr. Edwin Vieira on our channel regularly. He says the word emergency and emergency powers does not exist in the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. It's an invented thing by the deep state to try to change our constitutional republic into something else, a totalitarian state. And it's not just our state, it becomes a global problem. Can you talk to us about that phenomenon that keeps rearing its ugly head of this claim of global problems, which then are said require global solutions, which means our own cities, states, and even national governments are deemed to have no say-so if there's going to be edicts, recommendations, guidelines, call them what you will, coming down from on high from unelected sometimes nameless, faceless globalists.
Yeah, and of course, there's nothing new under the sun, right? So to go back to education, Plato was the first one that I can find that really identified the idea that, hey, if we could get the state to brainwash the children, we could have philosopher kings rule forever, right? It'd be great. The same thing with this issue of crises requiring solutions. Frederick Bastiat, early 1800s, the great French philosopher and lawmaker, identified this same exact pattern. He said these totalitarians, they like to create the poison and the antidote in the same laboratory. So they create a crisis, whether a real or imagined one, right? If people believe it's a crisis, doesn't matter whether it's real or not. They create a crisis, and then they pose as the saviors, and they offer you the antidote to the very poison that they unleash. So that's exactly what we're dealing with here. And they have figured out that, hey, if a national government can seize all kinds of new and totalitarian powers under the pretext of a crisis or emergency, we could do the same thing at the global level. And so now we're facing multiple so-called global crises, whether it be pandemic, health crises, whether it be climate change, whether it be economic crisis, of course, the energy crisis, which they have completely engineered, again, under the guise of saving us from climate change. They've engineered an energy crisis that is going to get more and more significant. They've engineered a food crisis, and they're talking about it now. The Secretary General said last year we could be facing multiple famines simultaneously in the years ahead. And of course, they act like they're going to be the saviors. They're the ones who caused this by, under the guise of saving us from climate change, wiping out small independent farmers, ranchers, food production, etc. So they're creating these crises for a reason. They've told us what the reason is. They've been public about this for decades. George H.W. Bush, back in 1991, told us we needed a new world order where a credible United Nations would bring in the rule of law to govern the conduct of nations, where they would use their peacekeeping role, in other words, their military forces, to implement the vision of the UN's founders. So we know what they're doing. They're trying to build a one world system, very much modeled on the communist Chinese system. But that requires some really, really significant crises to get people who are accustomed to liberty, who are accustomed to being able to make their own decisions, who are accustomed to prosperity, to be willing to surrender those things. And that's what we're watching right now as we speak, not just on the climate front, but all of these other fronts. The ultimate objective, make no mistake, is a totalitarian one world system that would basically leave a tiny cabal in charge of everything, where you will own nothing, to go back to the great taking that we started with, and they will control everything. So we've got to get ahead of these narratives. We've got to recognize that the idea that totalitarians can save us from the very problems that they have created is preposterous, and it's dangerous. And we need to recognize that even if you believe in these crises, freedom has always been the best solution, whether that be to the environment or to the problems of poverty or energy issues or starvation. Freedom and free markets have always been the best way to deal with these things. Tyranny always makes the problems worse.
All right, we'll take it one more step further. Freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of association. There's been a huge assault on these things. It's been blatant in the past. According to Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute, it's been going on for decades, since the McCarthy era, et cetera, that there have been FBI, CIA, et cetera, intelligence operatives planted within the major media organizations, which are, again, under great consolidation, centralization over the past several decades, to make sure that the message gets out in align with what the deep state wants it to, rather than allowing the kind of free speech that might be dangerous to the state, which means standing up for the truth. But anyway, now there has been a case submitted by both the Florida Attorney General and the Texas Attorney General that's being got some preliminary hearing at the Supreme Court. We've had Justices Sotomayor and Justice Amy Coney Bryant both weighing in, not supportive of the Attorneys General. The Attorneys General are concerned that, especially revealed during the COVID era, that there was a amount of censorship that's never been seen so blatantly before, either in cooperation with or supervised by the government, against people, deplatforming of individuals, shadow banning, so-called fact-checking, and so-called stamping out of malinformation, etc., all in the name of public well-being, public health, public safety. However, they're saying this kind of censorship is it's unconstitutional. It's against the First Amendment. And yet, the justices who have spoken out of this seem to be standing up for the rights of the censors rather than the rights of the individuals to have free speech and free thought. Can you talk to us about the implications of that and why it's so essential?
Well, without free speech, freedom dies. It's just that simple. If you can't speak out against the lies, if you can't speak out against the tyranny, becomes very, very difficult to oppose it. And so what we're dealing with here is, of course, a government-controlled censorship operation. And we have the proof of this. We have the emails from the White House telling Facebook, telling YouTube to silence people, to silence ideas, to silence criticism of all sorts of different policies. We all know this. I mean, none of this is a secret except the people that are maybe still watching CNN and MSNBC, a very rapidly dwindling segment of our population. So we all know here that this wasn't just big tech companies waking up one day and saying, you know what, let's alienate half of our customers. Let's silence half of our customers. I mean, that's a great idea. I would take it even one step further. If you look back at the history of these organizations, the Facebooks, the Googles, et cetera, they were actually started with help from the government, right? In-Q-Tel has been a major player in all this, the investment arm of the intelligence community. DARPA has been a major player in all of this, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So to act like these are just free market operations of individual companies with no pressure from government is ludicrous on its face. And we now...
And just to make a point, that is the justification that's been brought forward, that yes, we know it's unconstitutional for the government to censor. That says that in the Constitution. But these are private companies, and that's their venue that they've created, and they have a right to police it as they see fit for their business operation. Go ahead.
Yeah, and people need to understand that that's not what happened here. That's not what is happening here. In fact, I really enjoyed the interview that Mike Benz did with Tucker Carlson. Mike Benz used to work at the State Department, and he has in-depth personal knowledge of some of these censorship operations. And what he exposes is that this is much bigger than just the Biden White House. You've got the military-industrial complex here. You've got NATO operating here. You've got big pharma operating here. It's basically fascism. It's collusion between big government and big corporations. The Italian fascist Benito Mussolini described fascism as the merger of state and corporate power. That's what we're dealing with here. This is a fascistic operation to silence all dissent on the critical issues of the day. And frankly, I think people ought to be thrown in jail for this, right? It's a federal felony to infringe on somebody's constitutionally protected rights under color of law. Under color of law means that you're pretending like this is legal. You're pretending like this is a legitimate government function, but really this is a lawless operation. It'd be like a police officer kidnapping a woman and pretending like this was some sort of legal procedure. No, censoring Americans is not a legal procedure. Threatening companies to silence people who are criticizing you is not some sort of legal procedure. This is infringing on somebody's constitution protected rights under color of law, which is a federal felony punishable by decades in prison. If somebody dies as a result of this, it's actually punishable by death. So we need to get beyond just slapping people on the wrist and saying, no, don't do that anymore. We need to have actual accountability here. This idea that government officials ought to have sovereign immunity or even qualified immunity to behave in a lawless manner. We've got to dispense with that. People who are engaged in silencing and censoring Americans under color of law must be held criminally accountable. So the Supreme Court, unfortunately, leaves much to be desired. I don't expect that the Supreme Court is going to save us, but state governments can and must do a lot to rein this in. And if we don't, if we lose our free speech, I feel like I'm a broken record here, but these are all existential threats, right? If we don't deal with the great taking, if we don't deal with the brainwashing of our children, if we don't deal with the systematic silencing of Americans, we're going to end up as slaves, as serfs, or worse. And so these are all issues that people ought to be paying attention to. I know we all have stuff to do. We all have families to feed. We all have jobs we have to work. But if we don't deal with these things, they're going to deal with us in a way that we are not going to like.
Yeah, Stephen Covey in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, talks about the difference between management and leadership. Management being tactical and making sure you got the right skills and the right materials and the right people in the right places. Leadership being you've got the vision of where you're headed and you're making sure you're working. And he talks about the managers are in charge of making sure as they chop their way through the jungle that the machetes are sharp and that they got the right number of machete wielders out there and they're properly fed and so on. And the leader climbs the tallest tree and looks far and says, "Wrong jungle." So here we can be, as you say, we're all busy. We're always going to be busy. Parents are busy paying their bills and earning enough, putting the food on the table and doing the things that you have to do just to get through your week. But maybe you don't realize that the tracks that we are on, the tracks that our children are being placed on, the tracks that our finances are being taken on, the tracks that our so-called constitutional republic is going as far as being separated from its roots in terms of guaranteeing our free speech and our Second Amendment rights, et cetera, et cetera. are all taking us in the wrong direction. We can't just keep busy, or we'll end up in a place that none of us want to be in. And it's a grim future for us financially, in our families, in our freedoms, in our privacy, in our spiritual growth. So you've got many suggestions for people, many resources, and a lot of these solutions tend to local back to local solutions. You push back and nullification of unconstitutional laws at the local, county, and city and state level, rather than waiting for Washington or The Hague or whatever to fix the problem. Can you talk to us about those? And you mentioned one: pull your children out of school, do homeschooling, get cooperated in a church-related or other cooperative school. That's one example of a local solution rather than trying to fix the system that has been off the rails for a century. Other examples of local solutions that people should be making sure are happening right now.
Yeah, thank you, Donegan. And I would say really just start with your own individual life. Start with your own household. That's the easiest place to start. Are you eating healthy? Are you consuming good information rather than propaganda, psychological terrorism, psychological operations being perpetrated by people who hate you and want to destroy you and your family? So it begins with you. Take your kids out of indoctrination centers that are hurting them and get them a real education. Educate yourself. Get to know your neighbors. Get to know people in your community so that you can organize effective resistance to this. I do believe state governments are going to have a huge role to play. We're already seeing this, but state governments can and must take these threats very, very seriously. Thomas Jefferson, known as the father of our Declaration of Independence, and James Madison, known as the father of our Constitution, both said that the rightful remedy to an out-of-control federal government is not the Supreme Court. It is the states saying, no, we're not going to tolerate that. The states created the federal government, right? It was the states that came together, held a constitutional convention, wrote the Constitution, and eventually ratified the Constitution. This is a contractual relationship. They created an agent to undertake certain responsibilities. The bulk of those are outlined in Article 1, Section 8. If it's not on that list, run a post office, have a Navy, have a patent office, a small list of things that they're supposed to be doing. They're not doing those things either at all or very well. They're doing all kinds of things that they were never authorized to do. And just in case it wasn't clear, the 10th Amendment just spells it out in plain English. The powers not delegated to the United States are reserved for the states and for the people. So at the state level, we could and we must resist this tyranny coming out of Washington, D.C. We must fix the financial side of things so that we can protect ourselves from this great taking. We must fix the climate scam so that they can't dismantle our energy sector, so that they can't wage war on our farmers, so that they can't wage war on the small businesses that provide the jobs, the income, the resources that we depend on to live. So these are all things that we have to do. And nobody can do all of these things, but everybody can do something. So start in your own home, then get active in your city, your county, your state. At this point, I think the federal government is essentially a lost cause. People have been working on trying to fix this for 100 years. It just gets worse and worse and worse. But at the state and local level, we can make a huge impact in our own homes, in our own lives. We can make a huge impact. And enough of that will eventually, I think, provide the critical resistance that we need so that when this crazy system comes crashing down, at least sensible people can pick up from the ashes and rebuild.
Alex, for people who want to follow your prodigious work, where should they get connected?
Easiest place is libertysentinel.org. That's my personal website. People can sign up for my free newsletter. We put it out twice a week. I do a daily TV show. It's the Sentinel Report. People can also find that on my website. And then my X account, ever since Elon Musk bought it, free speech, at least a little bit has come back. So I post quite a bit there. It's Alex Newman _JOU. And of course, I'm regular on your program, Donegan. I appreciate very much you having me on.
I was going to mention that, folks. If you don't want to miss a single episode with Alex, make sure that you subscribe to Liberty and Finance. It's free, and we don't share our emails with anyone. So all you got to do is go to libertyandfinance.com, put in your email address, click submit. Make sure you confirm on the confirming email, and you'll get one email in your inbox per day with our latest interview, including with Alex or any of our other guests, any weekly specials. Alex Newman, author of Indoctrinating Our Children to Death. Thank you for joining us again here on Liberty and Finance. Do you want to hold up the book one more time so people can see it?
Sure. So here it is. It's Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, Government Schools War on Faith, Family, and Freedom, and How to Stop It. Available anywhere good books are sold. And thank you again for having me, Donegan. It's an honor and a pleasure.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for March 4th through March 11th, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature backdated 1-ounce silver maples at $3.39 over spot. We also have circulated British gold Queen Elizabeth sovereigns at $26.99 over melt. And finally, we're offering our choice 1-ounce palladium bars at just $119 over spot. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.